Gentlemen, on behalf of the Europe Information Direct Center at the University of Luxembourg, EDIC, I welcome you warmly to our new webinar entitled Grand Duchess Charlotte, A Voice of Her Own, organized on the eve of Luxembourg National Day in collaboration with the Comité Alstad and the Centre National de l'Audiovisuel. I am particularly grateful to our keynote speaker, Professor Sonia Kmet, Associate Professor at the University of Luxembourg, Institute for History, an outstanding researcher in history. I express my thanks to the Photographic Library of the Grand Ducal House for having made available for us this photograph illustrating the webinar, a picture of Grand Duchess Charlotte taken on 14th April 1945 in front of the Grand Ducal Palace, Marché aux Herbes, when the Grand Ducal family returned from their exile. I would also like to thank the partners and their team who worked on the organization of this event, especially my colleagues Joana da Silva from the EDIC and Cécile Duval from the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History. Ladies and gentlemen, Luxembourg has celebrated its sovereign birthday since the 18th century. When Grand Duchess Charlotte, born on 23 January 1896, ascended the throne in 1990, the date for this birthday celebration became 23 January, and this date was declared a national holiday in 1947. But in December 1961, the Grand Ducal Decree set the date of 23 June as Luxembourg National Day, when the country would officially celebrate the monarch's birthday. National Day has continued to be celebrated on 23 June during the successive reigns of Grand Duke Jean, born on 5th January 1921, and Grand Duke Henri, born on 16th April 1955. National Day is one of the symbols of the monarchy, together with the coat of arms and the anthem of the Grand Ducal House. Through the keynote address entitled Grand Duchess Charlotte, A Voice of Her Own, Professor Sonia Kmet will shed light on that event and give us new insights on the whole period of country's history. But what will be the program of today? So, first of all, the address of Professor Kmet, then a photo exhibition, Milestones in Grand Duchess Charlotte's Reign, produced by the Comité Alstad and presented by Joana da Silva, then a debate with the audience, and at the end, a screening of a biographical film about Grand Duchess Charlotte, entitled Je maintiendrai la vie de son Altesse Royale la Grande Duchesse de Luxembourg, by Jos Pauwels, a film realized in 1964 by Jos Pauwels and gracefully provided by the Centre National de l'Audiovisuel. This webinar will be in English, but questions may also be asked in French, German, and Luxembourgish. Before to give the floor to Professor Kmet, I would like to invite Joana da Silva to present you some technical elements for this conference. Joana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena. So you have two options to ask questions. So the first option is you can speak to the panelists. As an attendee, your microphone will be muted and your video will be turned off by default. And if you would like to ask a question, you can let me know you want to talk by clicking on the raise hand button placed next to your name in the participant list on the left side of your screen. Your microphone will then be unmuted and you will be able to speak. The second option You can write your question to me and to the panelists. So just type your question in the text box on the Q&A panel on the right of the screen and send it to me and all panelists. To edit your question, just highlight the text you want to edit and then right-click on Windows or select CTRL and then click, if you use Mac, to use the editing commands in the menu. I will screen this explanation during the debate. So if it was now too quick, you can always check on the page how it works. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ju. So let me introduce the speaker. Sonia Kmet has studied history at the Centre Universitaire de Luxembourg, Paris 4 Sorbonne, Glasgow, Strathclyde, and Durham. She did her doctoral research at the University of Oxford and graduated in 2004. As postdoc, she was part of the Lieu de Mémoire project led by Professor Michel Marc at the University of Luxembourg. Since 2010, she is Associate Professor in History and Cultural Studies. Her field of research are identity and memory studies, gender studies, popular and material culture. She has authored numerous research publications in her specialty areas. Professor Kmet, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Right. I hope you can see it. Does it work? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to give this talk and to have the occasion to take a closer look at the reign of Grand Duchess Charlotte 35 years after her death. Maybe just to start with a small anecdote, I remember actually her portrait hanging in our primary school in Redange when I was a kid. And for me, she epitomized elegance with her tiara, her long glacé gloves and her pearl earrings, but also authority and kindness in soft colors. As a historian interested in gender roles and representations, but also in memory culture, I would like to explore today with you how she was perceived throughout her reign and how she is being remembered. This is not really based on any new research, just on the current state of historiography, combined with a question scholars working on female rulers throughout history often ask. To what extent were women on the throne able to develop their own agenda? What was their agency, or in German, Handlungsfähigkeit, Handlungsmacht? As a historian, I will try to be neither hagiographical nor polemical, but simply expose different points of view. When asked during a survey in 2004 what the most important event in national history was, about half of the representative sample of about 1,000 people did not reply. About 20% said the national holiday, which is of course a recurring date and not an event. And less than 5% each named the enthronement of the current Grand Duke Henri, Charlotte's grandson, in 2000, national independence in 1839, the European construction without a specific date, and the liberation after the Nazi occupation. However, if one looks more closely at the actual responses, Grand Duchess Charlotte also appears, connected to different dates. Some respondents remembered that national holiday used to be on Charlotte's birthday, like we just heard before, on the 23rd of January, and that it was later changed to the 23rd of June because the weather is generally nicer. Others mentioned the date of her enthronement in 1919 and some that of her death in 1985. 4 people mentioned her actions in World War II, her not giving in to the Germans, her speech in 1943, and her return from exile. There were also more random mentions of her visit to Differdange in 1963 or her inauguration of the Canal de la Moselle with de Gaulle in 1964. The Second World War, Nazi occupation, and Charlotte's speeches from exile, in fact there were 14 BBC speeches altogether, which according to research by André Linden were the subject of a documentary film as well, directed by Ray Tostevin, which my colleagues and I discussed in the magazine Forum, which is open access online. That was in 2008. In that context, we received reactions from viewers who were upset about the film and the very notion of exile, as they had perceived it as a flight from responsibilities. The doubts the Grand Duchess had about leaving the country in 1940 and to what extent this influenced the occupation regime were discussed in 2010 by Serge Hoffmann in an extended Tageblatt article. It just shows that there are some fissures in the image of the widely accepted symbol of national independence and resistance which Charlotte embodies. This forms, in fact, a stark contrast with the image of her sister, who preceded her on the throne, Marie Adelheid, a subject of many articles and conferences, such as La Mémoire Sélective, which René Wagner held at the University of Luxembourg in 2014. Gilbert Rausch has also written several articles about the iconization of Charlotte. And there are, of course, many works on the Nassau-Weilburg, now Luxembourg-Nassau ruling dynasty. And there are exhibitions, such as the one by Comité Alstad, which we will see. But contrary to Marie Adelheid, who has attracted many biographers, Charlotte's life still has to be written, in the hope that the Grand Ducal archives will one day be available. At the time when statues of former leaders are being attacked and their flaws exposed, Grand Duchess Charlotte is standing serene at the Place Clairefontaine next to buildings housing the government. The statue has become a meeting point for demonstrations, but has never attracted any trouble itself. The monument by Jean Cardot was inaugurated in 1990, and its round-shaped pedestal bears the inscription, Madame, mir hun ich gern. Madame, we love you. It was financed by public donations. The statue is bigger than life-size, yet accessible, touchable, unlike the 19th century statues of William II and Princess Amalia, and a popular motif for tourists holding her hand. Today, I propose to cast a spotlight on 3 periods of her life, starting with her accession to the throne in a very turbulent January 1919, following the abdication of her sister. A second part will deal with World War II, and the final part will briefly look at the time of the Cold War and European construction, until her son, Grand Duke Jean, succeeded as head of state in 1964. The RTL film we will see today was made in that context. Charlotte was the second eldest of 6 sisters, here sitting in the middle, cutting flowers. On the right, Marie Adelheid, who has ascended the throne in 1912, barely aged 18, but determined to rule. Although this was in terms with the constitution, Marie Adelheid's taking sides in favor of the conservative Catholic Party and even dissolving parliament in 1915 attracted much public criticism. In addition, she was seen as being too German-friendly during the First World War, when Luxembourg's neutrality was violated and the country occupied by German troops. On 13 November 1918, Marie Adelheid was suspended by Parliament, and a referendum was suggested on the future state form of Luxembourg. During the revolutionary days of 9th to 11th January 1919, she abdicated in favor of her sister Charlotte. On 14th January 1919, Parliament accepted to send a delegation to Charlotte to obtain her oath on the Constitution, which she swore at Schloss Berg the following day, just a week before she turned 23. Interestingly, there seem to be no photographs of that occasion, contrary to the very solemn enthronement of Marie Adelheid. The reasons why the instauration of a republic failed in January is beyond our scope today. But Charlotte's reign did not start with popular rejoicement. Although she had never expressed any political opinion herself, her engagement to her cousin Felix of Bourbon-Parma, who had fought on the Austrian side in World War I, was disapproved of by liberal and socialist politicians and newspapers. Prince Felix was, however, of a family seen as French, and his brothers had fought on the Allied side. He was by far less controversial than the spouse of their sister Antonia, who had married in 1918 the hereditary Prince of Bavaria. The referendum, organized on 28 September 1919, after the introduction of universal suffrage, including female suffrage and the revision of the Constitution, clearly showed support for Charlotte. Only in Exile a majority pronounced itself in favor of a republic. The second vote concerning the country's economic orientation was in the end not carried out, as France declined in favor of Belgium. But let's stick today to the political orientation. There's a very interesting press analysis by Wolfgang Alt, which shows clearly that liberal and left-wing newspapers came to interpret the holding of the referendum itself as victory, and gradually accepted Charlotte as elected monarch by the grace of the people and not by divine right. Moreover, at the verge of the Second World War, notably after Munich, there was great fear in Luxembourg that a second German invasion and annexation were imminent. The patriotic favor of the 100-year celebrations of independence must be seen in that context. It was a dance on the edge of a volcano. The dynasty, Charlotte and her son Jean, but also Prince Felix, performed a joyeuse entrée in each of the capitals of the 12 cantons, except for Diekirch, because by September 1939, war had broken out and the celebrations were cancelled. As you can see here from pictures of the film Du Centenaire by Hart and Leclerc, the pictures really, the houses were decorated, the streets were decorated with patriotic imagery, with the flag, with the red lion, with slogans taken from songs, and quite ubiquitously also portraits of the monarch. On 10th May 1940, Luxembourg was invaded. It was not officially annexed by Germany, but from August onwards, a de facto incorporation took place under the leading Nazi party member Gauleiter Simon. I can obviously not go into any details here, but I can refer you to the excellent exhibition in the Musée National de la Résistance in Exile. The government and the Grand Duchess left at the very last moment, only to return after the liberation, when Prince Jean had joined the Irish Guards. And in the meantime, Grand Duchess Charlotte was seeking to firmly place Luxembourg among the Allies, thus abandoning the traditional policy of neutrality. Her voice, in particular, played an important role in conveying both to the Allies the cause of Luxembourg, as to the Luxembourgers the cause of the Allies. In a series of 14 radio broadcasted speeches, Grand Duchess Charlotte urged to resist Nazi ideology, yet expressing also understanding for the young men drafted against their will into the Wehrmacht. André Linden has clearly shown that the speeches were drafted and redrafted many times by the government, who recognized in her, the Grand Duchess, the most powerful weapon of counter-propaganda. In the United States, she was seeking to rally support for the war effort and undertook what was called a goodwill tour. All of this is described in great detail, many interesting archival photographs and films in Leif Letzeboyer, the film I mentioned previously. Charlotte's voice and her face dominated these campaigns and were also used by some of the home-based resistance movements. For instance, there's the Spengelskrieg at the very beginning of the occupation, where people wore little pins made out of coins bearing her face as a symbol of resistance. At the same time, however, Charlotte was explicitly and unequivocally not a voice of her own. In fact, her entire political life, Charlotte sought to avoid the image of a personal reign positively haunted by the fate of her sister. Serge Hoffmann has assessed her doubts about leaving the country and how she was convinced by her ministers that this was the only way to avoid being instrumentalized by the Germans. I'm not going into the actual liberation. We already seen on the poster this image of April 1945 when Grand Duchess Charlotte returned and was greeted by huge crowds of people in front of the palace. She also undertook a very mediatized tour of the destroyed north of the country, north and east of the country, destroyed by the Ardennes offensive, and really became a symbol not just of independence, but also of resilience and the reconstruction after World War II, taking up a very maternal role. So even though the government under Basch was criticized, Grand Duchess Charlotte managed to remain above these discussions after the end of the war and was mainly in the news for family events such as the wedding of her son, new grandsons and granddaughters being born, foreign state visits. Here you have a picture of her visit to the US with John F. Kennedy, and official inaugurations such as the one of the Moselle Canal here in 1964. The Cold War was a background to all this, as was the European construction, but she never took an explicit political role in the sense that she expressed her opinions, although one can clearly see that there is this representing official Luxembourg policy in the context of the alliance with the US and also within the European construction process. So to conclude, and I'm really rather be more brief in my presentation to have more time for discussions later on, but because I'm sure there will be interesting questions. So to conclude, for Grand Duchess Charlotte, a ruler in a constitutional monarchy who ascended the throne in particularly troubling times and who had asserted her legitimacy by way of referendum, to express a voice of her own was the very last of her desires. She became and remained so popular, despite occasional grumblings, which have only very rarely been addressed by historians, because of her political restraint. She became a symbol of national independence, and today the monarchy still is an emblem which is used to open doors abroad and which at home can be shared by all, as this nation branding page suggests, making the monarchy popular in every sense of the word. I thank you very much for listening, and I hand over back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now I invite, before public is asking the questions, I invite Joanna to present you the exhibition created and provided by Comité Alstad.
Unfortunately I have a problem with sharing, so I will try it again. I'm sorry.
Sonia, would it be possible to share your screen with us?
Sonia, could you please share the presentation? I'm sorry, but I have issues
no problem.
on my computer. Thank you very much.
One second, I'm just... Okay. Just let me know when to start.
That's great, thank you. You can leave it on that page.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so sorry for these issues. I will now present to you a photo exhibition on the milestones during Grand Duchess Charlotte's reign. This exhibition was kindly produced by Mr. Claude Esch from the Comité Alstad, which is an association created in 1937 that aims to preserve the history of the historical center of Luxembourg City. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Yes.
One second, I just have to go back to the screen.
Okay, no problem. Very good, thank you. So here you can see, yes, thank you. So here you can see the birth certificate of Princess Charlotte Alexandre Elisabeth Marie Wilhelmine. The Grand Duchess Charlotte was born on 23rd January 1896. Next slide, please.
Sorry, it's an automatic thing. I'm just, here. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and this photograph from 1904 shows Princess Hilda and Princess Charlotte Marie Adelheid. Next slide, please. Yes, another family picture. And then here you can see Princess Charlotte on a visit to the Königstein fortress in Germany, where her grandmother, Grand Duchess Adelheid Marie, resided. Yes, thank you. Another family portrait. Next, please. And here a side portrait of Princess Charlotte when she was 17 years old. On the 6th of November 1919, Princess Charlotte married Prince Felix of Bourbon-Parma, later Prince Felix of Luxembourg. And this photograph is dated from 1921, and it shows Grand Duchess Charlotte, Prince Felix of Luxembourg, and Prince Jean, born on the 5th of January 1921. There are some other family portraits. And then in 1939, Luxembourg celebrated its 100th anniversary of national independence. Grand Duchess Charlotte, Prince Felix, and Prince Jean leave the chamber. And this photo shows a parade of military troops in front of the Grand Duchess in the court of the military barracks. Next slide, please. Here are photos when Grand Duchess Charlotte was on exile. Next slide, please. And on the 14th of April 1945, the Grand Duchess returned from the exile. Next, please. After returning to Luxembourg, the Grand Duchess visited localities which had been destroyed during the Second World War. Next, please. In 1956, Grand Duchess Charlotte received a golden rose from Pope Pius XII. The golden rose is a gold ornament which popes of the Catholic Church have traditionally blessed annually. It is occasionally conferred as a token of reverence or affection. Next, please. It's fine, thank you. In 1958, the Grand Duchess and Prince Charles visited the Willibrordus exhibition in Echternach. On the right, you can see the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Joseph Besch, and the former Director of the Lycée Classique d'Echternach, Jean Limpach. Robert Schuman, former President of the European Parliament, welcomes the Grand Duchess during a Congress of the European Coal and Steel Community. Grand Duchess Charlotte welcomes King Baudouin of Belgium during a visit in Luxembourg. Grand Duchess Charlotte meets John F. Kennedy, former President of the United States of America, during a visit in the United States of America in 1963. Grand Duchess with two French politicians, Charles de Gaulle and René Coty. I'm a Luxembourgish boy. Those were the words the famous photographer Edward Steichen used to present himself in front of the Grand Duchess on the 16th of April 1963 in the US. Next, please. On the 12th, yes, here are other pictures of Grand Duchess Charlotte in her office. Next, please. Yes. On the 12th of November 1964, the Grand Duchess abdicated in favor of her son Jean, who became the successor. Next, please. Yes, this was when she announced that she will abdicate for his son Jean. Some pictures of Grand Duchess Charlotte. The Comité Alstad received the Grand Duchess on Easter Monday in 1976 to give her a tour of the E-Meissen Festival. This is a family portrait. One last important event in the life of the Grand Duchess was when she received a visit from Pope Jean-Paul II on the 5th of May 1985. Next, please. This is an article announcing when Grand Duchess passed away on 9th July 1985. And here you can see the royal cipher of Grand Duchess Charlotte. The last picture of Grand Duchess Charlotte. Next, please. So thank you very much for your attention. This exhibition has been produced by the Comité Alstad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for your presentation. Thank you, Sonia, for your account. And now we open the floor for questions. You are invited to ask your questions orally or by written messages. Yes, Joanne, please.
We have received some written questions. So here's one question from Anna Jagos, and she asks you, was Grand Duchess Charlotte, with regard to fashion and style, a trendsetter in Luxembourg?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I think fashion and style, I mean, she was very, very classical in her style. I would have to have a closer look on whether she appears in any reports on about fashion, but my guess would be that she was not that kind of, she did not play that kind of role. Unlike maybe other monarchs, Lady Di or people like that, she was, when she came back, especially after the Second World War, when this became more of an issue maybe in the media, she was already a very maternal figure and did not, I think, play that role, but this remains an open question.
She has written another question. Does the intronization of female regent differ from intronization of male regent? Which crowning jewels were used for this occasion?
Good question. More research needed on that. What is interesting, I find, with regard to Grand Duchess Charlotte, that her intronization was a very low-key event that was contrary to others. But there are not that many examples. There is, of course, the more recent one of Grand Duke Jean and Grand Duke Henri, which were very, very different, but also in a very different context, in a much more appeased context, and where the country did not face as big political issues as in 1919. So it cannot really be compared. So it's not a gender issue as such, I think, but also a context, a question of the context. As for the jewels, I'm sorry, I really don't have an answer to that, but that would be definitely worth investigating.
We received another question. Did Grand Duchess Charlotte use her ties to other royal families for the benefit of Luxembourg?
Good question. Well, she was very close in the 1950s, of course, to the Belgian royal family, as her son married Josephine Charlotte of Belgium. I'm not sure how she used these ties. I think, yeah, it's I think after the Second World War, to use these ties for political purposes was not so much on a possibility as it was, of course, before the Second World War, and even more so before the First World War, where these royal ties, if you think of Victoria and of the Kaiser and so on, were very much more important, of course, and for Marie Adelheid as well. But they kind of clashed sometimes with national interests. In the case of Marie Adelheid, dynastic interests were not necessarily the same as national interests. So I think for Charlotte, she dissociated both, as far as I can see.
Could you comment on the reasons why Grand Duchess Charlotte received from the Pope the Golden Rose?
Yeah, that's also something very interesting, which intrigued me. I only looked up this Golden Rose, which apparently has a very, very long tradition since the early Middle Ages of a kind of token given by the Pope to different rulers, initially only male rulers, but then also female rulers, and as a sign of appreciation, as a sign of support, but also in the case of the most recent decorations as to honor virtue as such, so to kind of recognize political, dynastical virtue, but they're mostly given to rulers, but also, I think, more recently to associations. But exactly the context, the reasons for why the rose was given to Charlotte in 56, again, is a subject of research. And I think we're just seeing here there's much research to be left, to be done. So yeah, it's an interesting question.
There are some more. So one question: could you expand on Grand Duchess Charlotte as a symbol for the Luxembourgish political culture, the double attachment to a kind of democracy without republicanism?
Yes, I find that also very interesting. How, because of this referendum, a monarch was reinterpreted in a way as a popularly elected figure. So it's I think it's due to that very foundational event in 1919 that Charlotte was able to be that symbol. To what extent she then passes it on to her son and grandson remains to be seen, but it's still all going back to that referendum, at least for the liberal and left-wing public opinion. For the more conservative public opinion, of course, the monarch is per se a symbol of the country. So this double attachment is very visible, especially in the years, well, in 1939, in the celebration of the 100 years of independence. And I found it interesting that the year of independence, 1839, was mentioned at all in the survey, because that's a really long time ago, 1839, but it is being used and celebrated again and again. So in 1939 and in 1989, it is being put on the agenda again. And so this, yeah, I think the link to independence as well, the link of the monarchy to independence is very strongly made then, whereas the link between independent and republicanism would also have been possible, but was never able to really impose itself.
Thank you very much. There's another question. Could you recall the places where the Grand Duchess lived in exile during the Second World War?
Yes, so I think she went to Portugal first, if I'm not mistaken, with her family. And the family then continued on a slightly, so the Prince Felix and the children went on a slightly different course than she did. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that she went to London by herself, whereas the family was in Canada, I think, for a while as well. And she, of course, then made this tour through the US. All of that is explained very well in Leif Luxemburger, so which I haven't seen in quite a while, so I'm not entirely sure again. But living in different places, definitely. And very often, what I think from a gender perspective, very interesting, that it was her husband who then was kind of in charge of the kids, and she took that more official political role.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Could you give some examples of her interest in the improvement of social welfare of workers in the steel industry?
Good question. Her interest for social welfare, I think the example that comes to my mind most immediately is the maternity ward, the Maternité Grand Duchess Charlotte, which she inaugurated. And the Œuvre Grand Duchess Charlotte, who kind of bear her name, and which have, of course, many social projects they support. As for the steel workers, I would have to look it up. I can't say at the top of my mind what kind of initiatives she made there. Those are often initiatives by the kind of paternalistic initiatives by the owners, by the big industrialists such as Emil Mayrisch and Aline Mayrisch, who are known for their social work, for the social initiatives. Grand Duchess Charlotte, I would have to look it up, I'm sorry.
Thank you. We have many more questions. Another question is, how did Grand Duchess succeed in establishing very tight connections with US President Roosevelt during Second World War?
Yes, that's also a very interesting question. So in the documentary film, this is shown as Charlotte playing on her charms, on being liked on a very personal level, being appreciated and liked by President Roosevelt, and on humane kind of interaction, connecting. To what extent this was the case, or whether there was more strategic kind of interest on both sides, I think it was a mixture of both. But it is, I think that there are several examples of how President Roosevelt showed his appreciation, and the one quote I showed you as well, "Don't worry, dear child, I'll take you home," shows a very kind of paternal approach towards this woman who was actually no longer a child at all, but it's also maybe kind of a symbol for a small country that has to be taken care of by a larger nation. But yeah, the exact nature of the contact, I would have to look it up again. There's of course important literature on that by Georges Heisburg, who wrote several volumes on the government in exile.
Thank you. Another question is, when will the Grand Ducal archives be available for researchers?
That is a question I cannot answer, but it would be very important. I think there are several examples of other countries, most prominently Great Britain, who have opened their archives regarding the life and the correspondences of the monarchs, because they are heads of state. So I think for researchers it would be very, very important to do that, yes.
And linked to this question was also another question, why aren't they open now?
Again, that's a question I cannot answer. There are different reasons one might imagine, but for Charlotte, I don't think it's an issue of something really to hide, because from what we can see, it seems as though there were no real scandals, or there was no dark side. So it's really not really, it's difficult to understand. Maybe it's just a matter of privacy, of intimacy. They want to safeguard, but it's the actual reasons one would need to ask somewhere else.
Another question, was Grand Duchess Charlotte in favor of Benelux and of European integration?
Good question. Again, the archives are closed, so we don't know. I guess so, from her official actions, her inaugurations. I cannot imagine why she would be opposed to that. But we don't know what she actually thought and what she believed.
Thank you very much. One last question. What do we know about the background within the family of the power shift between Marie Adelaide and Grand Duchess Charlotte?
The power shift. Well, from what I have read, and there is the biography by Josiane Weber, which is very interesting on that, is that Marie Adelaide proposed Charlotte in November 1918 as a successor. It's not clear that this was the case from the very beginning. So it was sometimes historians have argued that from the very beginning, Marie Adelaide did not really want to govern, and that she thought that Charlotte was much more adapted because of her more open, jovial nature. And Josiane Weber has shown that this was not the case, that Marie Adelaide was very determined to rule. But at one point, I think quite late in 1918, she thought that politically it would be, to save the dynasty, it would be important to let Charlotte step up. There were some discussions about some other sister taking over because of the connection with Prince Felix. But in the end, I think Charlotte, the choice of Charlotte was accepted by the majority in Parliament, and from that point onwards, there was really not a big hesitation. I mean, the referendum showed that the other options, another sister or another dynasty, only got 1 or 1.5% of the vote, so that was really not an option.
We have received one last question. Is it possible to access all Grand Duchess Charlotte's speeches?
The speeches by the BBC, yes. So André Linden has seen them in his article, which was published in 2002 as a part of the exhibition Het Verworren alles so einfach in the City Museum. So there you find all the necessary references and also many examples, many citations of these speeches. But there are many other speeches which are hidden in different archives which remain to be kind of treated, which have not yet been published together.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you to all the participants for your questions.
Thank you very much as well to the questions. I always think that the questions are more interesting than the presentation. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to look at this very interesting figure.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for your talk. Thank you to all the participants for their questions. I have myself a question, if you permit. What is, in your opinion, the most important achievement of Grand Duchess Charlotte as sovereign of Luxembourg?
That's a huge question. I don't know if it's her achievement of course, resistance during World War II is, I think, in general for Luxembourg a huge achievement. The many signs of resistance. Of course, not everybody resisted. So we know nowadays that about 10% of the population actively resisted, about 10% actively collaborated, and about 80% just tried to survive and to make the best of it and had a passive resistance. But Charlotte became a symbol for that, for national resilience and resistance. So whether it was really her, whether it was actively her achievement or the way she was being used as counter-propaganda, as I illustrated, that's a very difficult question. I think that is it is an achievement in the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again for this very inspiring talk. And now I would like to invite you to watch together this archival document, Je me tiendrai, a film realized in 1964 by Jos Pauli, when Grand Duchess Charlotte abdicated in favor of her son Prince Jean, Grand Duke Jean. And this film was gracefully provided by the Centre National de l'Audiovisuel. It was restored. Nevertheless, the sound may be a little bit loud. So I invite all the participants to adjust the volume of the sound to the maximum in order to have a good quality of